love goes on, softly on. So don't be sighing or crying. Still live with our
All right, welcome to another Lawyers, Guns, and Money podcast about Game of Thrones. I'm Scott R. Kaufman. This is...
I'm Steve Atwell.
And we're going to be talking about the laws of God, gods, and men today. I actually think this was the best episode of the season.
I think
it's a book reader opinion, and we'll get to that. I think everyone else still prefers to see Joffrey die, but we knew that was coming. So, why don't we just get started with the beginning with a very exciting trip to the bank.
Yes, and you'll notice they're very much setting Braavos up in this episode as something to keep your eye on. Braavos gets added into the credits as the world's most intimidating piggy bank. And then we get that amazing VFX shot of Stannis and Davos sailing under the legs of the Titan of Braavos. And then we cut to apparently like 6 hours later where they're being kept waiting, as one always is in the bank. And one of the things that we learn, of course, in our cultural exchange here, is that apparently in Braavos they like power moves. They like to keep people waiting. And I love the difference between the giant high-back chairs and the tiny benches.
Oh, absolutely. And the way that Stannis is trying to sit comfortably in his not a throne. Especially when you compare it to scenes later in the episode where Tywin is just lounging in his throne. Right, or not his throne, his son's throne.
Well, but the throne that he clearly has been missing sitting in for years.
Yeah.
It's like he's coming home. It's like when you have a favorite old chair, and you've been away for it for a while, and just sitting down for the first time. It's like that feeling.
Except it's made of swords.
Yeah. So, the interesting thing here is, obviously, we can see Stannis is impatient. He is barely restraining himself from throttling the people he's talking to, because in his mind, this is a question of right. But we get this very interesting divergence between the two cultures, where, the Tycho Nestoris, one of the played by Mark Gatiss, sort of makes this kind of comparison in which he says, in Westeros, everyone talks about, rights and blood and usurper and drama, and here we're all about numbers. What are the numbers? And, Stannis has to admit that he's got 4,000 men, he's got 32 ships, and he's got no food, which apparently works out to a bad credit score. But that's when we get, honestly... If it hadn't been that this scene was in this episode, I think this would have been the killer speech of the episode, where Davos kind of makes his best pitch for why Stannis should be given this money on the grounds that if Tywin goes, then the Lannister House of Cards is going to fall.
Yeah, and it's not even clear that that's really what the bank would want. Do they really want that kind of instability? I mean, Davos is offering him a whole lot of things it's very unclear as to what the actual desire of these, I want to call them middle management, but...
loan officers?
Yeah, loan officers. What they actually want, other than to put Stannis in his place.
Well, I think the pitch he's making is ultimately about priorities. He's basically saying, look, Tywin is a solid man. He's someone who can bring stability and order to the Seven Kingdoms, and that's what you need if you're going to get loan repayments. But Tywin's an old man. He's 67. And the moment he dies, there's no one left guarding the shop who's any good. And the one thing that you can say about Stannis, I mean, arguably, the thing that one of the reasons why he's so disliked in Westeros is that he's such a hard ass who is going to make damn sure that the bills get paid and before anybody can have any fun, becomes his selling point here. That if you put Stannis in power, he will make sure that the Iron Bank gets paid no matter what.
That is true, and I mean, there's a little bit of tension here because Stannis should be able to communicate that himself. He shouldn't actually need to.
Well, but he doesn't think he has to. I mean, that's the issue. He's pacing around. He's barely communicative. I mean, to be honest, let's face it. On the Myers-Briggs spectrum, Stannis is very much an introvert. So.
And the way that Davos actually tries to play the power game a little by standing up midway through
and literally showing them the hand.
Yeah. It's almost as if he's trying to teach Stannis the way he's been trying to teach, or the way he's... I don't know, it's another scene of teaching almost that we've been getting a lot of these seasons, this season. I just, I don't know how... I mean, obviously it was effective given the next scene.
Yeah, and where he shows up on Salladhor Saan's punchline, although apparently he's been telling old jokes, and sort of throws down a very hefty-looking sack of gold. And apparently there's a crate of it at Salladhor Saan's house. So Stannis may have started the day with 4,000 men and 32 ships. He's about to get a whole lot more.
Yeah.
And then we go from there to, I think, the most controversial sequence in the episode, although I think people have been somewhat misinterpreting it. Asha/Yara attacking the Dreadfort to try to release Theon Greyjoy.
I mean, I thought it was clever the way that they turned Theon's, Ramsay Snow's letter about Theon into an almost Braveheart-esque speech, or sort of rouse the troops moment. I thought that was very clever. I still think a lot of viewers just have a problem getting all worked up in favor of Theon.
I don't think that was the issue. Everything, all the reactions I've read said that what most people were annoyed about, what they didn't get was she's come all this way, she's made so many rousing speeches, and then she runs away.
Oh, well, in the terrible scene in the kennels.
Yes, but I think they've misinterpreted the point of that sequence in the kennels. So here's my theory.
All right.
The real significance of that scene is not so much the fight sequence, which I think was not the best staged, but that ultimately, once she's got Theon out of his cell, his first reaction is to bite her hand as hard as he can and run back into the cell. So, in a sense, no matter how the fight had gone, right, the mission has kind of failed because there's no Theon there to save.
I would agree with that. I mean, we sort of got that, in previous episodes with the shaving.
Well, but that just shows that he's scared of Ramsay. What I think this shows is that the psychological torture has been so profound that Theon will view any attempt to help him as a trick, and only, has his Reek identity, that, he doesn't have this Theon Greyjoy identity anymore. So, in a sense, he can't be found. He can't be rescued because Theon's not there now. Unfortunately for the Greyjoys, their prince is in another castle.
And that sort of segues nicely into the next scene in which Theon is asked to become his old self.
Or to play his old self.
Yeah.
Ramsay, it's a fascinating scene, but Ramsay is very clear, you're here to pretend to be someone you're not. And in some sense, it's a test of how good Ramsay is at psychological torture. He's, in a sense, letting his captive go and putting him back in his old position and seeing if he'll come back of its own accord.
There's also a sort of visual echo of the scene between Loras and Renly from the early seasons, the mutual bathing. And that was a little uncomfortable for me because when I taught it, I always taught that scene as being a great example of the sort of normalization of homosexual relations. Like, this is just an intimate moment that happens to be between two men. And to sort of see that recast between Ramsay and Reek, yeah, you can imagine why that would make sense.
I don't even know if you could call this, homosensual even. Like, what's really operating in the bathing scene is the tension of, are they going to show you what's happened to Theon? How much of it? And watching Reek's internal calculations, because you look at the way he reacts to everything as, one, always an immediate threat, right? The bath is a trick. The, clothes are a trick. The do you love me is a trick. But at the same time, knowing that he has to produce the right... It's not enough for him to flinch in terror, right? Ramsay doesn't just want terror. He also wants this kind of adoration control. So he has to produce the right emotional and verbal responses to satisfy his captor. So I thought it's not so much, honestly, about love, it's about Ramsay observing his work, doing maintenance on his work. It's like he's washing a car.
But he does actually come out and ask Reek if he loves him.
Yes, but this is a very different kind of love.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's move on from there to a simpler story.
A goat.
About a boy and his goats.
Yes. It's a goat.
Yeah.
It's a dragon goat.
Yeah, Drogon gets some lunch and takes out an entire flock in the process. Great VFX shot. You really are starting to get a sense that these are starting to become dragons with a capital D.
That is one good way to put it. I thought it was impressive the way it came out from behind the hill and actually surprised us because they didn't really place us anywhere when they just showed us the goats. We had no idea where we were or what. And
it's funny, they made it shocking despite having shown that scene about 1 billion times, or at least the opening sort of rising up from underneath. They showed that about 1 billion times in the previews, but they nicely kind of misdirected.
Yeah. And then just when you think you're about to get a whole bunch of great dragon action, we cut
to small claims courts.
Yeah. And I mean, it's strange that this episode, I ended up liking it so much because we started at a bank, we end up at a small claims court. I mean, this is...
And then we go to felony murder trial.
Yeah. I mean, this is really the kind of bullshit you normally don't want to have to put up with in a show. And I think we do learn a lot, though, because I think what we're seeing in all of these cases is we've had a lot set up, and now we're actually seeing how the characters are reacting to the circumstances that they've been put in.
Yeah, and I also think it has to do with we're learning about questions of institutional power, right? The bankers of Bravos have institutional power. In this case, Dany is learning what institutional power means, that it's very easy for her to make that judgment where she pays the goat herd 3 times the value of his goats, and that makes her feel good. Everyone on the dais kind of, gives themselves a little pat on the back. But, one, that creates a problem that every goat herd can now just roast his goats and show up with a sack of blackened bones. But there's no easy solution for the Hisdar Zolorak case.
Yeah, I mean, but before we get to that, I think there's a real sense in which, by pointing out that there are 212 more applicants out there, right? They are indicating that Dany has made a severe tactical error here with her generosity. and it's one.
Well, I mean, I don't think that's quite what they're going for. I think they're just going to show these are the burdens of power, right? If you say I want to stay in Meereen and rule, this is what ruling means. It means you have to make all of the decisions. You can't just sort of make a feel-good decision and pat yourself on the back and call it the end of the day. You have to deal with all of the issues, even the ones that make you feel bad, even the ones that call into question the morality of your previous actions.
And that's a nice segue to her treatment of the Masters, which she claims was no crime.
Right, and we sort of are dealing with a question, therefore, of exemplary punishment, right? That Dany sort of seems to have picked out 163 slavers at random and gone eye for an eye with them. And Hisdar is kind of very diplomatically not saying that this is injustice, but saying, I want some element of continuity with our traditions. I want proper burial for my father. I loved him. I can't condone what was done. I accept the new order, but I still want this element of continuity. And, I think this is a somewhat ambiguous situation, which is, how good can a good slave master be? Right? Even assuming at face value that Hisdar's father spoke out against the torture of children, Hisdar's father also owned people.
Well, let me tell you about the Negro. I heard. Sorry, I've heard it so much lately.
Yeah.
It's that's what I heard.
Yeah.
And let me tell you about
a Confederate widow asking for her stolen horses back or something. This is
if the horses were people. Yeah.
Yeah, if the horses were people. I'm thinking of a particular sequence from E.L. Doctorow's book about Sherman's March. But, anyway, so I think an ambiguous scenario, a scenario that calls into question the morality of Dany's actions and, in a larger sense, what her relationship is going to be with the citizens of Meereen. That, she's made a revolution, but now she's in the position that she is ruling over two classes of people, the freedmen and the former masters.
I was how she the theme of Reconstruction is as applicable as the actual battles of the Civil War here, because this is how do we deal with a society that is not based on class, but is still class-based. In theory, it's not based in class, but...
Yeah, and hopefully you'll see my answer about that in Esquire coming up. So we go from there to the small council room, where Oberyn Martell seems to give nary a fuck. No one really respects Mace Tyrell at all. And Varys doesn't really think much of how Cersei is reacting to certain developments.
Well, I think and this is something I was reading about, and I couldn't, for myself, really determine how in sync are the events of this narrative and what we just saw in Essos. Because for them to know what they know about Dany, how fast do those little spiders actually move? Because it seems like this could be like a year apart. What's going on in Meereen could have happened a year ago and it taken that long.
Just in terms of what I know of the geography, we're talking 2 months at the earliest.
Okay, so the narrative is now getting out of sync. We're actually watching the Dany narrative in a past tense.
Well, except that we don't know how long Dany's, that court scene could be 2 months into her reign, or it could be the day after.
Someone get us a fucking TARDIS. No, it looks like, it seems to me as if the narratives are getting out of sync, which I actually would find very interesting if they did, because it allows for the movement of information through various different channels to affect the outcome much more quickly. They sort of brushed over that where, oh, did the Raven come in earlier seasons?
Right.
You know, everyone seemed to get stuff simultaneously. But now we're having events narrated where they can't just send a Raven as, you know...
Well, although there's some interesting sort of bits of information here. Number one, things that we've learned. They know that Dany is now the Queen of Meereen. They consider Mormont to have defected. They know that Sir Barristan has defected. And Tywin wants to send a letter via Varys's little spiders, his birds, I think is the term they actually use, to deal with it quietly. Now, what do you think that entails?
I mean, obviously, you have to have the writing, the transmission, the movement from one port to another.
Sure, but think about what happened the last time Tywin started writing letters.
Last time I started writing letters, Rob kicked his ass a couple of times.
Right, after that. I mean, okay, I'll skip to the end of my own story here.
Tell me.
The Red Wedding.
Okay.
Right, you see, all the ways through Season 3, right, leading up to the Red Wedding, Tywin is always writing letters whenever he's talking to anybody. And as he says, I don't remember if he says it in the show, but he definitely says it in the book, he says, some wars are won with swords, some are won with letters. And so, you know, pay attention to this. Tywin is sending letters to Meereen. Something is going to come of that. The other thing that's important is that they are now aware, speaking of sort of time travel questions, time and travel questions, not time travel questions, Sandor's attack on that tavern is now news, and they've now put a large price on Sandor's head. So one of the things I like about this episode is we're seeing consequences. We're seeing actions and reactions. Sandor and Arya have a kind of a fun moment in the tavern, but now there are consequences.
And now I'm not remembering. Did they notice that Arya was with him?
No.
No, yeah, I didn't think so. They just said that he's going around saying
in that tavern.
Yeah. They just heard rumors that he's walking around the countryside saying "fuck the king" and killing people.
Yeah, and killing Lannister men. That's the more important
thing. So then we get, cut from there, the High Council to, the Iron Throne, and Oberyn bragging about his ear for lost accents.
Yeah, it's another, it's been a while since we got one of these Varys faces off with someone next to the Iron Throne scenes.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. I mean, we're seeing yet another side of Oberyn, that he is someone who knows the world, he's well-traveled, and at the same time, he's someone that Varys doesn't trust because he doesn't tell Oberyn the story that he told Tyrion. We also learn that Varys is asexual, even before he was castrated.
Yeah.
All I can say is that I feel very sorry for Master Illyria.
And then he offers one of his the biggest bullshit lines. He has no part of desire. He just has different desires. He doesn't have no part of desire.
Because it frees you up for other things and looks
free to seek uncomfortable affairs.
Yeah, makes you look at thrones in a different way. So we then go to the centerpiece of this episode, the trial.
And this is the third time this season in a marked departure from previous seasons, where we're getting, with the exception of the Blackwater episode, we're getting sustained scenes where and we're almost coming to expect a good 20 minutes at the end of every episode being devoted to one narrative
set piece. Yeah.
And I think, all right, just to sort of start us off, everything we've been talking about the previous weeks and everything that I've been writing about this sort of coming equality between Jaime and Tyrion, I somehow neglected to realize that once they put them on trial, they would both be fucking kingslayers. Like, I don't know.
Right.
Like, they, before the eyes of the people, they are now equals as well.
Yeah. And we start off their sort of meeting with this great line where he says, "We mustn't disappoint father." And it's important, amidst all of the sort of the talk of regicide and legality, this is also a family matter. This is exactly what Tywin would have loved to not have happen, which is the dirty laundry of the family being aired in public.
And I love how he sort of sends Tommen off, like, go away, King, it's past your bedtime, you don't need to hear any of this.
Yeah, and you see Tyrion almost looks grateful that his nephew isn't going to be a part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tyrion, it's sort of funny, like, Tywin and Tyrion are both, I don't know quite how to say it, they're both leaning a lot as they're sitting down.
Yes.
Tywin is doing that sort of magisterial lean. Tyrion is sort of going into his corner, and you feel like he would have actually ducked. He's
trying to get out of the way of all of this.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So the important thing is Tyrion enters a plea of not guilty. Importantly, he gets asked, did Sansa do it? And says he doesn't know. Which is interesting.
Well, yeah. Because at this point, we're still not entirely sure what Tyrion has put together yet. We don't have his fully articulated theory of what happened.
Yeah, although I think he makes a bad decision to say that it was the pigeons that killed Joffrey, because as we're going to see, there is evidence to the contrary. So we then get sort of, I guess you would call this almost like a Seinfeld-esque recap of Tyrion's greatest hits from previous seasons. First, Meereen Trant comes up and gives a sort of slanted take of Tyrion's arrival in the throne room when Sansa is being beaten. And Tyrion is explicitly denied a counter-examination. Pycelle testifies to poisons and then argues that Tyrion stole his poisons when he was arrested. Big piece of information and a bit of a divergence. They found Dantos on the boat and the necklace, which is interesting. So there's direct physical evidence of poison. Cersei then spins amazingly well, basically throwing everything on Tyrion, minimizing her own actions and Joffrey's actions, making Joffrey seem to be a hero. And Oberyn, interestingly, is the one who asks, what debt? And it's important to pay attention to the way the judges, who's leading here.
And I think one of the lovely things about Cersei's performance here is that it was so clearly a rehearsed performance, that if she were in front of any action, like, the other two, they were, and then he did this, and it's like, Cersei has her story absolutely straight. And so for everything we were saying last week about her possibly going off the rails, here it seems to be the exact opposite. She's in control of everything. Fuck you, Kaufman, you were wrong. Yeah. And then we have a recess after Cersei.
No. Don't we?
I think we have a brief recess for
testifies first. Then there's a recess.
We what?
Varys testifies against. So Varys testifies as to Tyrion's threat in the small council room, and brings in the question of, did Sansa make Tyrion sympathetic to the Northern cause? So they're clearly, Tyrion's on trial, but they're trying to implicate Sansa. And then Tyrion kind of tries to the extent that he actually is presenting a case for himself, tries to reintroduce the issue of Tyrion having saved the city, and asks Varys whether he's forgotten, and Varys says he hasn't, which is, again, something to keep your eye on.
And then the court
Then there's the reset.
In which Jaime decides to retake the mantle of a proper Lannister, and I mean, I was actually yelling the same thing at the screen that Tyrion would yell at Jaime shortly thereafter, which is, you don't think this deal sounds familiar? Like, this doesn't...
Well, that's not what I would have yelled. I would have yelled, don't you think he made that, like he said, done rather quickly? I mean, what I like about this is it's very much, this is setting up why Tywin is going through with this if Cersei is the one who really wants a conviction. That what Tywin wants is Jaime at Casterly Rock. And this trial is a perfect way for him to get that. So Jaime kind of blunders in with his proposal, and Tywin jumps on it immediately. You can see on Jaime's face that he realizes that this is what Tywin has wanted.
And then he tries to convince his brother that, oh no, father will keep his word.
And specifically ask for his trust. He says,
yeah,
do you trust me? And this is the sort of, in every tragedy there is a moment at which things, could have gone differently, but then everything went wrong. The moment Shay is brought into the courtroom is the moment that everything goes wrong. And it does point to an oversight on Tywin's part. That he really didn't think through what the impact of this particular testimony was going to be on Tyrion's willingness to accept this offer.
And I want to just add real quickly, HBO had this neat little fuck up with their closed captioning at this moment. They kept on referring to Cersei as hearsay. That's what the closed caption kept saying. So every time it said, well, what does hearsay have to say? I was like,
and her testimony is pretty much largely hearsay.
It was just one of those things where I knew exactly what they meant, but the closed captioner obviously was not familiar with the names of the characters in the show. And then we get Shay, and one thing I really liked was the constant cutting back to Oberyn, who was enjoying the ever-living fuck out of himself.
Oh yeah, he was just having fun. He wanted details. Whereas Mace Tyrell seems confused by the concept of a prostitute.
Yeah, and and going back to what we were saying about the first real conversation between Tyrion and Oberyn is, I really am getting the sense that he likes Tyrion, and Shay's testimony only makes him like Tyrion more. Like, he is really, it's like, okay,
Well, it's clearly they have something in common.
Yeah, fucking, and a love of it, but also, they. I don't know. I don't want to say pizzazz or something, but they clearly enjoy showmanship. I guess would be the best way. It's not enough to just do something. You have to do it with flair.
Yeah, but to get back to Shay here, I mean, what makes this scene so emotionally wrenching is the combination of truth and lies. Cersei, Varys, Pycelle, Trant were more or less telling the truth. They were spinning things, they were telling partial truths. But Shay is the first case in which there's an outright lie. And it's a lie pitched specifically at Tyrion's emotional vulnerabilities. That the part where Shay lies is she says, I was a handmaiden to his wife, they planned it together, Tyrion was happy to help murder the king, and specifically did it in exchange for Sansa's maidenhead. And, that just plugs straight into Tyrion's whole thing because it's public knowledge that Sansa was not sleeping with him. And the whole humiliation of their marriage, And then the part that's the truth is this reshaded version of of Shay and Tyrion's relationship, in which Tyrion, all of the kind of the most intimate private details are rehashed in a way that makes Tyrion look like a fool, makes him look like a monster, a predator, etc. And it's what breaks Tyrion. And there's that moment in which he says, Shay, please don't. And she says, I'm a whore, remember. And that really is quite wrenching.
It is, and there's also that sort of the oddly reminiscent of middle school when you're in the middle of the room and everyone is laughing at you and pointing at your sexual inadequacy. I mean, there's all sort of anxiety dreams at play there, but it's just, I guess I would say it breaks him, but it also, I think, reminds him that he is still playing the game, like that.
I don't think so. I think at this point he's given up.
But see, and this is the thing. Like, even when you were recounting it, I was thinking, everyone knows she's lying about taking Sansa's maidenhead, and I was trying to.
No, they don't.
Well, I mean, you just said that it was common knowledge that.
No, it was common knowledge that Sansa wasn't sleeping with him, and the story that she tells is that Sansa said, if you kill the king for vengeance for my family, I will sleep with you.
I got the sense that everyone.
I don't think that everyone thought that was a lie. As far as she's the only one who would know, right? She's the only one. Literally, she's the only witness on the inside who testifies to there actually being a conspiracy between the two of them. Everything else is circumstantial.
Yeah, and then okay, I guess you could say he breaks and he wants to confess, and we get a nice little Tyrion moment.
I mean, I would say, honestly, people have been calling this Peter Dinklage's Emmy reel, and I think it absolutely deserves that. That this is everything that has been boiling up in this character's life from day one. That he gets no respect for this. And it's interesting, he starts by turning around to the crowd. He doesn't go straight after Tywin initially.
No, he
confronts the ingrates.
Yeah. And then wishes them death.
Yeah.
I should have let Stannis kill you all.
Yeah.
Trying to take credit for the saving the city, which most of them give to his father.
Right.
And then
he turns to his father.
And, tells him, yes, I'm guilty of being a dwarf.
And that, in a sense, Tywin has been his judge his entire life.
Yep. And, pardon me 1 second.
Yep.
Get down. And, the moment where he says, I didn't kill him, but I wish I had, and he actually refers to him as a bastard.
Yeah, and it's interesting, he moves from the crowd to Tywin to, in a sense, Shay and Cersei. And it's almost like they're being the same, the two are almost merging in the way that he's treating them, where he says, killing your bastard gave me more, watching your bastard die gave me more relief than 1,000 lying whores. And in that moment, it's like Cersei and Shay are the same person.
And for all practical purposes, they, at least from his perspective at this point, they might as well be.
Right.
But again, going back to what we were just talking about how we seem to have seen all of this before, he then, of course, demands
trial by combat.
Which is part of what I was saying.
Third trial by combat we've seen in the show so far?
Definitely second.
In the Vale.
Yeah.
And then the Hound with the Brotherhood without banners.
Oh yeah. So this will be the third, and it's it's interesting. I mean, I was reading, people were playing Where's Waldo with Braun.
Yeah.
Yeah, where he is at the trial. Um,
And did he betray Tyrion? Right? How many people knew where Shay was?
yeah. Um,
Yeah, it's interesting watching the speculation. A lot of people think it's going to be Jaime.
Well,
A lot of people are saying Braun.
I mean, going back to his first trial by combat, he clearly was. I mean, the whole plan was to wait Lissa out by calling for Jaime and having him come and. But I mean, I would say that one thing that they have been setting up is maybe it's not going to be Jaime or Braun, but perhaps Jaime versus Braun.
That's interesting.
Just again, given all of the training sessions, I think we've gotten 3 of them so far, or 2. That might be one direction they go in. I'm speculating since they're constantly going off book at this point. I don't even feel comfortable saying, "Oh well, haha, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I think I know where they're going to go."
Well, we'll see next week.
Yes, we will. All right. This has been. Was there anything else you wanted to add before I?
No, that's it. I
All
think
right.
you did a good point.
Another episode of the Lawyers, Guns, and Money's podcast. We will see you next week, hopefully a little bit sooner. All right, I'm Scott Kaufman.
I'm Steve Atwell.
And we will talk to you next week.
Bye.